The silence of Alara's cabin was a living thing, a hollow ache that settled deep in the floorboards and clung to the cold tin plates stacked on the shelf. For 10 years, this silence had been her most constant companion, a stark reminder of the emptiness in her womb, a mirror to the barren patch of earth behind the house where only stubborn weeds would grow. Her husband, Silas, was a man carved from the same hard land they worked, his words as sparse as the winter rations. His presence was a comfort, a solid weight beside her in the dark, but it could not fill the echoing spaces within her. The town of Providence Creek held its own kind of silence for her, the kind that came after a hissed whisper, the pointed quiet of gazes averted in the street. She was the barren woman, a walking sorrow, a disruption to the natural order of things. This morning, the river was swollen and angry, its gray-brown water churning with the memory of last night's storm. Debris snagged on the roots of the willows that wept into the current. Alara had come to collect driftwood, her hands already chapped and raw from the cold, when she saw it. Tucked precariously in a tangle of exposed roots, just above the grasping water, was a basket. Not a sturdy work basket like her own, but one of finely woven reeds, clearly out of place in this harsh landscape. Her heart gave a painful, insistent thud against her ribs. She moved with a caution born of a life that had taught her hope was a dangerous indulgence. Mud sucked at her worn boots as she picked her way closer, the roar of the water filling her ears. It was a cradle basket, she realized, her breath catching in her throat. A thick oilcloth was stretched across the top, lashed down with twine. Fear, cold and sharp, warred with a terrifying, unbidden curiosity. She knelt, her knees sinking into the damp earth, and her trembling fingers worked at the knots. The twine was stiff and wet. A low, mewling sound, almost lost beneath the river's growl, reached her. It was not the cry of a kitten. It was too human. With a final, desperate tug, she pulled the oilcloth free. Inside, nestled in a bed of fraying but clean wool blankets, were 2 infants, their faces pale and still as porcelain dolls. They were impossibly small, their tiny chests rising and falling in shallow, rhythmic breaths. One stirred, its miniature hand unfurling like a flower petal. The other remained asleep, a perfect, silent effigy of life. Twins. The word was a ghost in her mind. Here, in this place of unrelenting hardship, where a single healthy child was a miracle, Providence had delivered a miracle in duplicate. Or perhaps it was a curse. Alara stared, the world narrowing to the 2 small faces. The cold, the river, the town's judgment. It all fell away. There was only the impossible weight of this discovery, the crushing despair of their abandonment, and the fragile, terrifying flutter of a long-dead hope stirring in the desolate silence of her heart. A single tear, hot and unexpected, traced a path through the grime on her cheek. She did not know if it was for them or for herself. Silas found her there as the weak afternoon sun began its retreat, casting long, skeletal shadows through the trees. He said nothing at first, his gaze moving from her stricken face to the basket she clutched as if it were the last anchor in a storm-tossed sea. He saw the infants, his craggy features betraying nothing, yet a muscle tightened in his jaw. Alara watched him, waiting for the verdict, for the practical, sensible words that would shatter this fragile moment. He would speak of the extra mouths, of the coming winter, of the questions that would descend upon them like a flock of crows. But he did not. He simply reached down, his large, calloused hand surprisingly gentle as he brushed a stray leaf from the blanket. His touch was a question and an answer all at once. In that single, silent gesture, a decision was made. They carried the basket home together, a shared, unspoken covenant between them. The cabin, once a vessel of emptiness, was suddenly filled. It was filled with the thin, reedy cries of hunger, the pervasive smell of boiled milk and laundered linens, the frantic, sleepless energy of 2 people navigating a world they had only ever watched from a distance. Alara moved in a fugue of exhaustion and awe. She learned the distinct timbre of each baby's cry, the way the boy, whom she named Caleb, clenched his fists when he was hungry, and how the girl, Lily, would stare at the flickering firelight with a solemn, ancient wisdom in her dark eyes. The hollow ache in her chest was replaced by a fierce, primal terror. Every shallow breath the infants took felt like a victory against the encroaching darkness, every moment of quiet sleep a fragile truce. Silas, for his part, became a silent fortress around them. He split twice as much wood, his axe falling with a relentless, rhythmic fury. He returned from his trap lines with extra pelts to trade for precious cans of milk. He sat by the fire late at night, his large frame hunched over the cradle he had hastily fashioned from a packing crate, simply watching them breathe. The town of Providence Creek did not rejoice with them. It judged. The whispers that had once followed Alara now swirled with a new, venomous energy. They came from the shadows of the general store, from behind the lace curtains of the respectable houses, from the sanctimonious lips of Parson Hemlock's wife. Foundlings, they hissed, the word itself a condemnation. River brats, some speculated they were the product of a local girl's sin, cast out to hide her shame. Others, more cruel, hinted that Alara had stolen them, that her barrenness had finally curdled her mind. No one offered help. No one brought a spare blanket or a pot of stew. When Alara walked to the store for supplies, a path would clear before her, the women pulling their own children close as if she were a contagion. She saw the suspicion in their eyes, the cold, hard curiosity that stripped her bare. She bore it, her spine a rod of iron, her gaze fixed forward. The hostility of the town became a whetstone, sharpening her resolve. These children were hers now. They had been given to her by the river, by fate, by a god she had long since stopped praying to. Their survival was her penance and her salvation, and she would not let the world's malice touch them. The first snows came early that year, blanketing the hard ground in a layer of pristine white that seemed to mock the town's sullied gossip. The world grew quiet, muffled by the deepening drifts. Inside the cabin, a fragile rhythm had been established. Caleb's cries were stronger now, demanding and full of life. Lily's solemn gaze had been joined by a slow, spreading smile that could fracture Silas's stoic composure in an instant. The bond between Alara and Silas, once a thing of silent endurance, was being reforged in the heat of this shared purpose. They spoke little, but their movements became a seamless dance of necessity. He would stoke the fire while she fed a baby. She would rock a cradle with her foot while he mended a tiny worn blanket. One evening, as a blizzard raged outside, rattling the window panes and piling snow against the door, Silas pressed something into her hand. It was a small, crudely carved bird, its wooden form sanded smooth. He had made it for the cradle. For them, he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the flames. Alara's fingers closed around the simple toy. It was more than a gift. It was an admission, a testament. They were a family. The thought was so powerful, so fiercely beautiful, that it left her breathless. This small, warm cabin was no longer a shelter against the world. It was the world itself, and they would defend it. The thaw brought not relief, but a new threat, carried on the muddy roads from a settlement upstream. His name was Jedediah Thorne, a man with a face like curdled milk and eyes that held the dead light of avarice. He did not come alone. He arrived flanked by the town constable, a man whose authority was derived less from the law and more from the approval of the town's most powerful voices. They stood on the porch, their boots sullying the wood Silas had just swept clean, their presence a violation of the sanctuary he and Alara had built. Thorne's voice was a gravelly rasp, full of a false, theatrical grief. He claimed the twins were his grandchildren, the offspring of his recently deceased daughter, cast into the river by a shamed lover. He had come to claim what was his. "My own blood," he declared, his gaze sweeping over the cabin with undisguised contempt. "They don't belong in a place like this with people like you." Alara felt the blood drain from her face. She stood in the doorway, a human shield between this man and the sleeping infants. Silas moved to stand beside her, his body a silent, immovable wall. He said nothing, but his hand rested on the handle of the axe leaning against the doorframe. The air grew thick with tension, heavy as the storm clouds that were gathering on the western horizon, promising another lashing of rain. The constable shifted uncomfortably. "Alara, Silas, he has a claim. He says he can describe the blankets they were wrapped in." Alara's mind raced. The blankets. Simple wool, one gray, one brown. Common enough for anyone to guess. Panic, cold and slick, threatened to overwhelm her. She had fought the town's judgment, the cold, the sickness. But how could she fight this? A man claiming blood right, backed by the law? It was a nightmare given form. Then she felt it. A deep, resonant anger, rising from a place within her she did not know existed. It was the fury of a mother protecting her young. This man did not smell of grief. He smelled of greed. His eyes did not hold sorrow. They held calculation. He was not here for the children. He was here for something they represented. She lifted her chin, her voice quiet but carrying the unshakable weight of truth. "What else was with them?" she asked, her gaze locked on Thorn. He blinked, momentarily thrown. "What? The blankets, I told you." "Wool." "No," Alara said, her voice dropping lower, each word deliberate and clear. There was something else, tucked into the folds of the girl's swaddling. Something only a mother or a true grandfather would know. She was bluffing. There had been nothing but the infants and the blankets. It was a desperate gamble, a single shot in the dark against an approaching army. Thorn's eyes darted from side to side, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. The constable looked at him, waiting. The silence stretched, pulled taut by the rising wind that whipped Alara's hair across her face. "A locket," Thorn guessed, his voice losing its confident edge. "A silver locket." Alara's heart pounded. She held his gaze and gave a slow, deliberate shake of her head. No, she did not offer the correct answer, because there wasn't one. She simply let his lie hang in the air, exposed and rotting. "There was no locket," she said, her voice now ringing with a power that stunned even herself. "You know nothing of these children. They are not your blood. They are my children." The declaration, spoken aloud for the first time, settled in the air with the finality of a judge's gavel. Silas's hand tightened on the axe handle. Thorn's face contorted with rage, his mask of grief dissolving to reveal the raw ugliness beneath. He took a step forward, but the constable put a hand on his chest. The lawman's eyes were no longer on Thorn, but on Alara. He saw not the barren, pitiable woman of town gossip, but a figure of immense and irrefutable strength. He saw a mother. Without another word, he turned Thorn around and guided him off the porch. "Let's go, Jedediah. There's nothing for you here." The storm broke moments after they left, a furious deluge that washed the mud from the porch and hammered on the roof in a deafening, cleansing roar. Inside, the world was quiet again. The babies, undisturbed by the confrontation, slept on. Alara leaned against the doorframe, her legs trembling, the adrenaline draining away to leave a profound, bone-deep weariness. Silas came to her, his large hand covering hers on the rough wood of the door. He still said nothing, but his eyes, when they met hers, held a universe of understanding, of pride, of a love that needed no words. The cabin was no longer a refuge from the world. It had become a fortress, its walls built of their shared resolve. In the days that followed, the silence from Providence Creek changed. The venomous hissing was gone, replaced by a grudging, bewildered quiet. The story of Jedediah Thorn's failed claim, and of Alara's unshakable stand, had spread like wildfire. They had all come to watch a spectacle, to see the barren woman broken, and had instead witnessed her anointing. They had seen her claim her children not with law or blood, but with a truth more powerful than either. People no longer averted their eyes. They offered curt, respectful nods. One morning, Alara found a pail of fresh goat's milk on her porch. No note to say who had left it. The town had been silenced, not by fear or shame, but by the undeniable force of a mother's love. That evening, as the last light of day bled from the sky, Alara sat by the fire, Caleb nestled in the crook of one arm, Lily in the other. Silas sat across from her, polishing the small wooden bird until it shone in the firelight. The silence in the cabin was no longer an ache. It was a comfortable, breathing presence, filled with the soft sounds of sleep and the steady crackle of the flames. It was the sound of peace. Elara looked from the faces of her children to the face of her husband, and she understood. A family was not something given, but something forged. It was built in the quiet moments, in the shared hardships, in the ferocious, unspoken vow to protect one another against the world. The river had brought them to her, a gift from the storm. But it was she and Silas who had given them a home. The emptiness was gone, filled to the brim not just with the presence of two infants, but with a strength she had never known she possessed. She had found her voice, not in shouting, but in the quiet, unwavering defense of her own. She was no longer the barren woman. She was Elara. She was a mother,